Time 2015. Yeah. And so kind of we bumped into each other again and again on this journey. So Nicola told me I should say a few words in Hindi if I can. तो मेरा नाम ड्रॉयकर है. तो मैं नॉर्मल में ऊपर हिमाचल प्रदेश में रहती हूँ, और लेकिन मैं 16 साल की थी, मैं जयपुर में रहती थी, एक इंडियन फैमिली तो, और मैं पढ़ाई करती थी. तो ये क्योंकि मैं थोड़ा हिंदी समझते लेकिन अच्छा नहीं है, तो ये क्योंकि इंजी में मतलब ये इंग्लिश तो थोड़ा अच्छा है ना. तो यस, maybe I better resolve to that, but I understand a little bit of your Hindi, so I try. So I just ask, maybe before we start anything, maybe we could take like just a few moments to kind of generate a positive motivation. Maybe at least that we can generate the 4 immeasurables in our heart of love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And that all these people inside this room and all these people outside this room all want to be happy and don't want to suffer. And there's all these numberless, beautiful, infinite sentient beings have all this great potential. A mind with the seed of love and with the seed of compassion and wisdom, which is why everyone is equally worthwhile and valuable. And all these infinite, numberless, kind and beautiful sentient beings who are so kind to us, they all wish to be happy, and they are searching for happiness all the time. I commit myself to bring all of them to live in happiness, true happiness, ultimate happiness. And all these infinite, numberless, kind, sentient beings who don't want to experience suffering for even one instant, but they are constantly tortured by the 3 kinds of sufferings. If only they could be free from all these problems and suffering. I commit myself to free all of them from all their problems and from all their suffering. I commit myself to dedicate all my time, energy, life, everything I have, everything I am, to love and to serve all sentient beings whenever possible. Never giving up, generating this joyous enthusiasm. and with the motivation to bring benefit to ourselves and others, we can now start this get together here. Thank you. So first of all, thank you so much, because I feel very honored, because this is a city center, and particularly because most of you are Indians, because the Buddha himself reached enlightenment here. So I feel like it's so incredible, and I feel so grateful for everyone who kind of wants to try their best from their side to kind of practice the best of their capacities, whatever this means to you. So I feel very, very grateful to kind of be in your presence. So thank you very much. And we have a very epic sound to that moment as well. So that's nice. Oh no, for him. So yes, so thank you for that, first of all. And then, so my topic, as you could see, is Dharma or drama. So first of all, who is totally, I guess nobody is totally new to Buddhism. So is there anybody who's here for the first time? No, okay. Then I can use already some of the terminologies, like there are some maybe terminologies that are not completely new. So then, in general, I like things to be very interactive. So whenever there's anything that you do not agree with, or anything that you feel needs to be addressed or needs to be asked, you can always just raise your hand, or not even raise your hand, just say it. So then we can talk together like that. I like it to be very interactive. Then I can learn from you guys as well. So the reason why I wanted to choose this topic is because there are many different ways I feel that we can, particularly because we're not so new, we can trick ourselves. So it's particular for people who have been around for very long, for a year, 2, 3, maybe 5, maybe 10. It's very easy to come to a Dharma center and listen to talks and, I don't know, go to teachings or think about the Buddha and these things without actually, forgetting how to connect the dots. Somehow, sometimes when we start the Buddha's journey, or like when we get to know Buddhism, we feel very inspired, and we kind of, or any spiritual journey, actually, it doesn't have to be just Buddhism, we kind of get maybe inspired and we start doing all these great things, and somehow at some point, it somehow stops. I don't know if anyone in your own personal journey has ever made this experience. For me, for sure. If not, congratulations. Then I can learn from you guys. Please give me the recipe. So, which is why I think it's very important to every now and then really check what are we actually doing. So, I'm gonna, the very first thing that particular Lama Zopa Rinpoche puts a lot of emphasis on is Dharma starts when we stop following the 8 worldly concerns. So all of you have heard about this whole concept of the 8 worldly concerns. Who hasn't? Okay. So we have the 8. I'm gonna do a quiz with you. So for those people who didn't raise their hand, what are the 8 worldly concerns? So we have 4 pairs of 2, which usually we always run after. So the first pair is that we want pleasure and do not like displeasure. So, for example, right now it's really hot. When we're outside, we feel, most of you most likely, feel a lot of displeasure, right? Because it's very hot, it's like 50 degrees and we're sweating. And then we come in here and it's feeling cool. Or if, who was the first person who entered this room? Okay, you. So, you guys. So, when you entered, the AC was not on yet, right? So you had to switch on the AC. So you were looking forward to get this cool sensation of the AC with the craving that the undispleasure of the heat kind of goes away. No, and that. Very good. So which is why you sit behind the AC. So, but in general, we try to modify, right? We try to modify our external pleasure or displeasure situation. So that's the first pair. Then the next pair is that we do not only like pleasure, and we do not like to be like we're trying to avoid the displeasure sensations, but we also like to gain, and we do not like to lose things. So that's the next pair of gaining and losing. Then the next pair is we like not only that we get things, that we have pleasure, but also we really want people to say nice things about us or to us. So we do like when people praise us, when they tell how great we are, and when they tell us how beautiful we are, and we really dislike the opposite. We do not like when people kind of put the finger on our like soft spots, tell us what we are not so good in, and tell us, the things that we might not like to hear. Not only do we like people to tell good things about us, we also want that they think good things about us, which I think is so bizarre. And particular, I don't know how it is for you guys, but so I have an Indian family in Jaipur, and I have two younger sisters. I have Chunchun, she wouldn't like if I call her Chunchun in public, but I have Chunchun and Munmun, okay? Kanishka and Sonakshi. So both of them are in their teenage ages, and we talked a lot about it, how incredible important reputation is in India. You can relate to that, right? There's so much emphasis on reputation and keeping one's reputation clean and pure and nice, and we want that people think good of us. So we have a lot of craving towards that one. So not only do we want that people think good, talk good about us, talk good to us, but also that they think good about us. So now with these four pairs, the problem is not having any of them. So it's really, I'm actually quite grateful that we are in a room where it's kind of pleasant, and we don't, need to sit outside in the heat. Otherwise, most likely nobody would come, apart from yourself, which I honor. So you're very brave. So there is no problem with necessarily receiving them, but the problem is that right now, if you're very, very honest, and maybe if the only thing that you're getting from this talk is to try to check in your own life one more time, really getting back to the bottom, namaste, getting back to the bottom of what the Dharma is, and really checking, am I directing my entire life based on those two sides of trying to avoid pleasure, trying to avoid displeasure or unpleasurable sensations, loss, criticism or unkind, unnice words, and trying to avoid bad reputation, and trying to get the opposite. If this is everything that you're living by, which usually, or I'm living by, or we are living by, if this is usually what we're doing, then it's not Dharma. So very simple. So even if you're coming to the Dharma Center right now here with the idea, let's say you heard Nicholas said, there is his friend coming, and everybody said you should coming, but actually you feel like I really don't want to go, but okay, everybody goes. If I don't go, then they will think bad of me, and this is why you came, then I feel very happy that I get the chance to meet you. Still, if the motivation is that people might be thinking bad of you, or might be saying, wow, this student is so great, they always come, they're so determined, no Dharma. So then nothing will move in our hearts, which is why if we look in this world, and you're very lucky and very fortunate that you actually receive these teachings, of since from great lamas and great masters like Geshe Dorje Damlo, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's really everything that everything that we have is due to his kindness. But somehow we're not touching those 4 points, those 4 pairs. We can't really get very far, which is why I think the very first thing is, in order to make anything move in our lives, is to be really bloody honest with ourselves and really checking, okay, are we tricking ourselves here? Are we here on a nice pleasure trip? Because in the beginning, meeting the Dharma and meeting, these nice people, you are now in a nice community, you have nice people together and so forth, it can be very easy that it's just wanting to run after the pleasurable sensation of getting a good new friends, get together. And then in particular, these communities where we're staying together, now you're kind of a nice group. What then happens is that then sometimes we become more judgmental about our Dharma friends than about anybody outside, which is, I think, totally wrong. Because sometimes what I heard in my own kind of groups of people where I have been with, and also in other Dharma centers, they say like, I can bear my neighbor shouting, beating at the dog and so forth, but I can't bear my, Dharma friend who's coming every time to classes and they kind of start gossiping about somebody else. So that means that we have lots of judgments and expectations, particularly from our Dharma friends that we are with together. So instead of kind of getting into that whole business, we want to kind of again make it about ourselves, in the sense that we want to train our own minds and then maybe be a good example and be grateful for everybody in our group, because just because they're coming, we get the chance to come as well, because it's all a big dependent arising, right? So I guess that's kind of the very first part when we're talking about those 8 worldly concerns, which basically has to do with we don't really know how to think properly. So somehow yesterday or today I had a conversation with a friend of mine who had used this very nice sentence saying, having learned the Dharma is really like what did he say? Like a cheat sheet, a proper cheat sheet for life. Do we call it cheat sheet in English? Like a Spickzettel? Do we call it cheat sheet? Huh? Yeah, a shortcut is more like when you go to an exam, and which I did, by the way, which is very bad. I'm confessing now something. So when I was even younger than now, I'm still very young, and was studying, so I did a lot of cheat sheeting until I was, and usually I didn't need it because just preparing it helped already, but still I did, so I'm confessing here, open to everybody also here. Then I stopped eventually, but it's really like a cheat sheet for life, if we earphones now, yeah, I'm still young, but I was thankfully before that generation. I don't want to be a teacher at this time. It's really, yes. So it's kind of like that, that when we go out in the world and we know how to think properly, the sentence that comes to my mind is again and again, it's like, what do you have to be afraid of? If you know how to think, what do you need to be afraid of in life? So, which is why when we look at like the 8 worldly concerns is what we do not want to think about. But in the same way that what then sometimes happens is that we try to do the opposite, that we think I shouldn't have anything, I shouldn't have, people talking nice to me, and we go into the other extreme. So then one day, one of my teachers told me a good practitioner is somebody who's gonna be fine while they practice, when they're feeling very good and when they're feeling very bad. So it should be both. So in the same way, if you're feeling very, very good actually, and everything is going really great, that if you're kind of stable in your mind and do not get this totally rush of, excitement, and do not lose the importance of the Dharma, then this is a sign of being a real good practitioner. Then you can do basically anything externally. So there's the story of, I think, Geshe Jampa Wangdu. I don't know if his first name is Jampa. Geshe Wangdu, who was one of the teachers of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And a lot of people praised him so much for being such an ascetic and such a good, renounced practitioner. And at some point, he started running around with he always was wearing very ragged robes. And at some point, he was running around with really fancy robes. And people really hated it. They really didn't like it because, of course, they were like, this monk, he was so renounced, and now he's walking around. And then one day, Geshe Wangdu and Lama Zopa Rinpoche were apparently sitting together, and then he said, I'm putting on these robes. And then they asked, like, why did you do it? Like, why do you wear these robes these days? And he says, because people don't like it. So that's better. And they think I'm such an arrogant, person. So it's better for my 8 worldly concerns, So sometimes it can look the opposite from the external. Sometimes, particular in the Dharma, we can read about what would be a correct practitioner, and we try to copy all of that. And then we're like a ripe mango outside, but inside totally like not tasty, not juicy. So we want the juicy inside, and then outside can be this or that, which is why it says in the Pramanavartika that really, in Tibetan it says, Ngam, Ngadawe Kansaki, Kansaki, Kansa. Yeah, so it says something like, people like me, which the Buddha says, so only people like myself, people like me and people like myself can judge other people. Everybody else who would judge another person, they will only, they would only kind of fail, or they would only kind of go down, you know, they would lose, basically, they can only lose from that, which means we really cannot go around and judge. You have no idea who is who. And I really like this mind training thought as well that one of my teachers once gave me. I don't know if it's true, I don't know if it's written somewhere in any Buddhist text, but he said, think that in every bigger group, and we're kind of a bigger group, there's at least one bodhisattva. So then you're kind of going around and thinking, who is it? You know? And then you start you start having respect for everyone, because you really don't know who could it be, because we really have no idea, you know, who is. So then, particular in, I think, such a group like you guys together, this might be very, very helpful, because then it will totally shatter, you know, our idea of being upset because of, you know, some person not doing what you thought they should do and so forth. Instead thinking, this might be the one secret bodhisattva, so I should be really careful and really grateful. So that might be helpful. Yeah, that was just something I wanted to mention. So these 8 worldly concerns is not so much about this whole external thing. It's rather, which I find actually quite sad if you think about it, just recognizing how dissatisfied our mind is. Like how much we are a slave of the dissatisfied mind. And you can see it if we're sitting in this room, everybody sooner or later will move. Every movement we do is usually coming from a dissatisfied mind that tells us, now I'm uncomfortable, now I need to move, now I need to do that. So we are constantly under the control of a mind that is dissatisfied, constantly telling us to do something. And it's not because anybody is evil or anybody is bad or whatever, but it's just because this mind tries its best to its capacity of what it knows to try to get satisfaction. So then, again, talking about how to deal then with problems, it's really like, if we recognize also in other people that anything they do is coming from this mind that is trying constantly, somehow, since beginningless time, to get this satisfaction, and somehow never reaches there. So then the next big question, like the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, if we're having a suffering situation, what is the actual cause? Then comes the big question of what is the actual cause for why we're suffering. So as long as we do not want to get rid of being a slave of a dissatisfied mind, I think we don't really get very far. So we have, once one of my teachers told me, how when you are in a negative emotion, or when you are under this sway, he likes this under this sway phrase. He says, when you're under the sway of harmful emotions, how upset are you with it? So how much fed up, how much do you feel it's enough? And this goes for all the afflictive emotions, including attachment, desire, including anger, including, you know, I don't know, lust, including pride, jealousy, and all these afflictive emotions. While you're not necessarily after you get out of it and after you kind of messed up and then think, oh dear, I did this again, you know? Not only that, but during the experience of the negative emotion or of the harmful emotion, of the painful emotion. Painful emotion is quite obvious that we don't like it, but there are other kind of emotions or states of mind that could come up. During that experience, how much do you have at the corner of the mind this feeling of, I'm fed up, I've done this 1,000 times already, I've been 1,000 times already tried to follow that afflictive emotions and try to use that as a way to solve my problem, and somehow didn't reach anywhere. Which is why if we feel this feeling of, okay, somehow it's enough is enough, you know, I've done it enough, I've ran enough into circles, then we start really getting the feeling, okay, now I really need a solution here. Now I really need to do something. So yeah, so this is why I think, again, talking about like how do you choose which path you kind of want to walk, it's really a matter of at some point kind of taking a choice to, when we take refuge, I mean, the whole concept of refuge, what we have, for example, in Buddhism, when we say in the beginning, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and so forth. I feel like when we really become an inner being, a Nangpa in Tibetan, like a person who really works inside, leave alone the religion right now, even though we're in a Buddhist center, it doesn't matter which spiritual religion one follows, but if you really want to become your own protector and refuge, it's really to say, okay, at some point you take the decision to take control of your own life. And I think this is such an incredible feeling when at some point you come and say, I'm actually having my own life. I really want to take ownership of my life right now. I really want to take ownership of my mind right now. And this can be so empowering. So refuge, although we talk about the causes for refuge sometimes to be fear and to be faith, but I think there is also a lot of confidence and almost empowerment in you that feels like, I actually can do something with my mind here. And it's more like to say, okay, when I'm going out today, I will not anymore want to be the slave of my own uncontrolled, dissatisfied mind. And then recognizing the dissatisfied mind coming up, you're like, there's the target. I'm gonna work with you now. Of course, it's gonna take a lot of time, a lot of work, but this feeling of like, yeah, ready to kind of ready to struggle almost. It's like this. I almost want the challenge. So it's like when you go to the gym and it's uncomfortable, and you kind of say, okay, I really want, I don't know, to get muscles in my abs. No, these are the abs, right? In my biceps and triceps. I don't know. I've never been to the gym, but so might not be the perfect example. But let's say you want to have good biceps. So then, there is there is the discomfort, but somehow there is also, while you're experiencing the discomfortable sensation, there's somehow also almost a joy in the stretch, if we do it right, if we have the right attitude. So you go to the gym, so this feeling that I'm there's like, okay, I'm stretching a little bit more because you know why you're doing it. So similarly with the mind, if we kind of get this attitude, then even particular when you're experiencing difficult situation, then you're feeling like, oh, now comes the juicy stuff of the Dharma out. Now I use whatever kind of things I've learned. Now is the time to kind of check what I can apply. So then it's not like, oh, the world is giving this to me. Poor me. We get so quickly into this whole world view of me being here as the center of the universe, and then everything else has to revolve around me. So somehow, if we kind of put this attitude the other way around, it's more like, almost I want the challenges, to kind of train my mind. Then it becomes very self-empowering, not kind of to breed this self bigger, but it kind of says, I can deal with it. So I think this is kind of a healthy attitude, which is why there are different ways of saying how do we deal with problems. So of course, when we look at the first thing, of course, is if we believe in a concept of law and of cause and result, there's nothing that comes without any cause. So whatever happens, if we want to have a positive results and kind of nice, comfortable situations, of course, the first of the 3 higher trainings is ethical conduct. So then, of course, as monks and nuns, that's kind of our main job. But then even more actually as a layperson, it's important to kind of keep that on track, to say, okay, how much can I train my physical and my verbal particular, behaviors in a way to live ethically. So that's tough in a full-on, in a big city like Delhi. Actually keeping ethics is not so easy, because even making business, good business without kind of getting unethical is very difficult these days, really. So, but that is, sometimes I feel we kind of skip that part a bit. So I tell you a story that I don't tell too many people. Oh, this is gonna be online, right? Okay, now it's out. Okay, we can maybe skip that part. Some of you nice guys know this already, but I once worked with a bank robber for 1 month. So there was a guy in from Norway. He invited me. So I'm not going to mention any names. I'm not going to go into any places. He's not living there anymore. But I bumped into this guy, and he said, I have a big company and I have no time, but my mind is a mess and I need to learn how to control it. Can you come and live with me for 1 month and train my mind? And I said, I don't know you, I've met you for a few minutes. I was at this time 21, 22, and he was like 40 something, 45. And then I checked with one of my teachers and he said, you have to go, you have to go. I said, okay, I trust you. All my friends and all my family, my aunties, they're all saying there's something not correct. They were all saying, maybe he wants to be your sugar daddy or something like that. So I lived with him in this so I became his shadow, every day. He told me for the first week, he said, okay, so from now on, I want you to see everything of me, every way that I behave, every way that I move, every way. So I said, okay, that's fine, I can follow you. And I told him, the one thing, for this to work, I put my life in your hands. So similarly, you need to put all cards open. If for this to work, please, we only have a month together, all cards open. And he said, took a deep breath and he said, okay, I have to tell you something tomorrow. So I said, okay. So then we sat together and he said, since he's been a teenage boy, he's done bank robbery and he's done that really professionally, and he has been almost half his year in prison, in and out of prison, always flew to different countries in Europe after he got out of prison to do the same thing again and again and again. So then eventually he ended up in Norway and said, okay, for 2 years, I'm gonna do it differently. For 2 years, I'm gonna, try my best to earn money, to live a normal life without doing criminal stuff. And he said it was so difficult because he got so used to living. Of course, he came from a very poor background. So again, there are always very many good reasons. And it was amazing. He became a millionaire without doing criminal stuff. So very interesting karma as well, right? I mean, just to end up in that situation. And I was very lucky to learn from him. So he liked all the teachings of the Buddha. He loved everything. He loved to apply everything. The one thing that he did not like was ethics. So we talked a lot about the whole concept of why ethical conduct is important, and what this basically, the really bottom line is to, as most of you might know, the sentence that His Holiness keeps saying, if you can help others. If you can't, at least do not harm. So, of course, if you're stealing, if you're kind of taking advantage of others and so forth, you are long-term thinking harming. So, which is why the first very important thing is, again, to check in one's own life. Okay, where am I actually slipping away a little? Where do I say, it's okay, Where am I not thinking so far ahead, but think just about the short term, which again goes back to the 8 worldly concerns. Where do I just get to the short term, pleasure that, or quick positive effect that I believe I get from, maybe bending my boundaries of ethical conduct too much without thinking about the great long-term effect. So the first thing is kind of to check that honestly. But then the second thing, of course, is when we think about how to deal with the problems that already arose. Because one thing is, right now we're creating the causes for something not to arise anymore. So now we know, in order to make sure that we're really on a Dharma path, we want to abandon the 8 worldly concerns, we want to abandon following that, and we want to live an ethical lifestyle, so that at least we're not creating heavy causes for heavy suffering and problems to arise in the future. But then, what do we do with the problems that already arise? Which is, being honest, particularly in a city like Delhi, I lived in a few bigger cities myself, stuff happens all the time, drama happens all the time, problems happen all the time. So then, how do we deal with them? And again, there are many different ways of dealing with these things, and You know, we can I think the easiest is to categorize them in three main big groups. The first one is basic awareness, meaning just being aware of a situation and applying awareness and having this full acceptance, I guess, you know, where you're saying, okay, these are appearances that I can use for Dharma practice. Not even yet thinking about love, compassion, emptiness, and all these big things, but just having basic awareness already helps us to create a gap between us and the situation, which already helps us to use that as a support for our Dharma practice. So then again, just switching the label from this is an enemy to my Dharma practice to this is actually a support for my Dharma practice, this is my friend for my Dharma practice, this already helps us to generate this openness and full acceptance. And I mean, maybe some of you have made this experience most likely yourself, that once you kind of fully dissolve into a situation and fully accept, fully kind of let go, often that already helps to really release, you know, any additional suffering. Because what we usually have is we have let's say this is my first negative emotion, that's my fear, let's say. Usually behind that we have another big one, which is aversion for this negative emotion. So let's say the fear of the fear, the anger about the fact that we're angry, the, I don't know, the lust that we like to be desirous right now. So usually we have two layers of emotions. We not only have the first kind of negative emotion, we have an emotion towards that emotion as well, which actually often magnifies it and makes it even more powerful. And then we don't even get to touch the first kind of emotion because we have so much stuff still in between. So the first way to kind of release that, and particularly with fear and anxiety, that really helps is just full acceptance and welcoming, which is easier said, of course, than actually done and felt. But even tricking ourselves, I think Geshe Marquesa Wamo always like to say, fake it until you be it. You know, fake it until you make it, fake it until you be it. So right now in the beginning, when we say these things, we just tell ourselves, I'm accepting it, I'm welcoming it. Whereas internally, we're saying, no, 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 I'm not welcome, go away, I don't like it. But in the same way, in order for us, Lama Tsong Khapa in his Lamrim Chemo says it really nicely, why analytical meditation is so important before, during, and after the stabilizing meditation. Because in order to actually stabilize our mind on something, we need information. So we know this with attachment. The reason why we keep being so attached to a particular thing is because we are constantly giving ourselves information for why this object of attachment is so attractive and so great. Same with anger. The reason why we can sustain anger and grudge for such a long time is because we're constantly giving ourselves information for why we should hate this person, or for why this person does not deserve our love, or why this person is totally unimportant. Similarly, for us to kind of change our habits, it's just a matter of giving ourselves the information again and again and again and again. And this is why sometimes when we're doing longer retreats, the main obstacle here that can come is boredom, that we think it's not exciting anymore. Dharma is not exciting anymore. We have heard it now so many times, and somehow the newness goes away. So then again, this is actually the time when we really get to touch, you know, the whole idea of, okay, I really want to change my mind. It's not just about the first excitement about the Dharma, but it's actually about wanting to do it again and again and again and again and again. And it's not exciting. It's just about reprogramming our mind, and that simply needs just time and information. So then by kind of giving ourselves this information again and again, we can be hopeful that similarly to our attachment and anger that we've trained our minds with or in, likewise by telling ourselves again and again, I'm welcoming it, I'm accepting it, I'm welcoming it, I'm accepting it. Similarly, we can turn our mind to be really more welcoming, so that we really feel like, great, you know, fear is there again, how wonderful, you know, and then we can start actually working with the negative emotion without this whole fight-flight game that we usually have in our minds, you know, of go away, or I'm just running after it, or trying to fight it. So, which is why I think of the three first, you know, or of the three different categories, I think, in which we can deal with, you know, negative emotions, the drama of life that we might be meeting. The first one might be just pure acceptance, and awareness. And then, of course, there we can go in, can have a long talk, you know, about how we actually do that. Even just doing mindfulness practice in a sense of using whatever negative or difficult situation we're experiencing as a means to concentrate. Maybe there I can also share, this doesn't have to be cut out because that's just my own garbage experience, but so my father had a period where he was very, in German we say cholerisch, like really explosive, you know, he could get very angry from one second to the other. And one day I closed, you know, I did the laundry, so my mother died, so then I had to do most of the household stuff with my brother, and then my father would come back in the evening, and sometimes, you know, after work, after going by the bicycle, after 1 hour, you know, all this energy came up, and then I closed the dryer or the washing machine a bit too loud and a bit too quick. So that was the last drop, you know, that exploded. So then and you, when you were 3 years old, you did this, and when you were 5 years old, you did this, and your faults are this and that, and why, you know, all these things. And I, thankfully, having learned already a bit of meditation, because I was very lucky to meet wonderful teachers when I was quite young, I just looked at him and said, aha, so now I'm looking at shapes and colors. So I saw just shapes and colors. His face getting red, spit flying from here to there, his eyes becoming big, you know, and you just see the shapes and the colors and the forms. No problem, mind very peace, you know, okay, just peaceful, you know, his hands going like that, okay. And then I said, okay, now I'm switching. So now then it took quite some time, huh? When my father was angry, it could go sometimes 30 minutes. So 30 minutes, very good meditation. Because then first 10 minutes, shapes and colors. Second 10 minutes, what was it? Oh yes, sounds. So I just recognized, sound goes up, sound goes down, sound becomes very sharp, sound becomes very soft. So then I just focused on the different sounds, you know, just the sounds, how they change, you know. And then at the last 10 minutes, I of course then tried to generate compassion, right? Because of course he suffered. The reason that somebody screams and so forth is suffering. But even just the awareness would allow your mind to be totally relaxed. So then you kind of don't have to get into a whole story, because the beautiful sentence of Shantideva, right? We most likely, hopefully, all of you know it, which is my mantra since I'm 16. It's like, if you can change something, what's the matter of getting upset? You can change it. If you can't change something, what's the matter of getting upset? You can't change it, right? It's so easy. If it were so easy, but actually it's that, right? So then if my father is in his rage, you know, there's no point in me kind of trying to say, by the way, shall we listen to each other mindfully right now? You know, no point. He needs to ventilate, he needs to get it out, and you need to be the one who's able to hold it. So actually being a good Dharma friend, at some point, this had nothing to do with Dharma, but I had this one friend who once told me, being a good friend to each other is to know the melody of the other person, and when they lost it, play it back to them. So how I translated this Dharma-wise is, okay, when somebody, you know, tries to be a particular person, tries to be a particular, you know, version of themselves and tries to practice the Dharma, and then when they kind of slip away from it, you know, when is the right time, and when they're ready to listen, and when they ask you, that's a very important thing, not when you want, but when they ask you, then you can tell them, by the way, didn't you want to kind of, how are you feeling right now? And do you feel okay when you kind of slipped away from this and that? Because I felt actually, you know, we can try different ways. But so even awareness, just mere mindfulness, you know, just mere being aware of what happens is already such a relieving thing, can already give so much ease in the heart. So that's the first part. The second part, then of course, when we talk about how to train the mind, when we have difficult situation, is, opening the heart. So of course, the more we see people doing weird, strange stuff, and being honest, in Delhi, people, not just in Delhi, in the world, people do weird, strange stuff. I mean, really. You just go from A to B and you see so much weirdness, so much strangeness. Sometimes I imagine, particularly when I'm flying, I like to look out, and look at the whole, and you see all, it's like ants, We're running the whole time from A to B. Again, going back to the dissatisfied mind, right? We're doing so much stuff. We're busying ourselves so much. I mean, even the concept of waking up in the morning to rush to work for 12, 13 hours or whatever, coming back to earn some money, to then maybe have a week or 2 weeks of very blissful holiday on the beach a year, even that kind of is so bizarre to me, of how we how we made this concept of how we want to live. But of course, we are in a situation. That does not mean that if we're doing that we do not practice Dharma. Again, it really depends on the mind. So if you are like a full-on business person, you can have the most purest, a way better Dharma motivation than myself, being a nun or, studying or whatever. So, but even if you just zoom out and look at the kind of crazy madness world that we are finding ourselves right in, and seeing how it all comes from a dissatisfied mind, seeing how it all comes from this very pure seeking for just moments of happiness, and then always ending up in more dissatisfaction, because this is all what people are doing. I mean, we're running after things, putting so much effort to something, and there is no evenness in it. There's no evenness in any of that. Even if people behave in so bizarre ways, it's always just them trying whatever they can, and then always ending up in a moment where they're, oh, that was not it. And then again, do the same thing all over again. So this is how the world is at the moment. That's the madness of the world that we find ourselves in. That's the root, really, of all the conflicts. That's the root of all the wars. That's the root of, the greed that we have regarding, climate change and all of that. Never having enough. It's really that total dissatisfied mind that we are a slave of. If we can see whatever negativity we perceive of, that we receive from others, as almost like a small child who's trying their very best, trying to satisfy the dissatisfied mind that they are, a slave of, then this becomes really then the worse the person treats you, the more they become your object of compassion and love, because recognizing that they are really under the sway of their negative emotions, really no control in their own minds. So then, whatever we experience, again, what do you need to be afraid of? Now you're having two tools. You can transform anything in either just first having awareness, first using that as your mind to get back to your mind, as your way to kind of stabilize your mind. And then second, you can use anything that you're meeting, any situation that you're meeting, as a means to generate compassion or loving kindness. And with this whole topic of loving kindness and compassion, particularly, so you guys are very fortunate in the sense that, or we all of us are actually extremely fortunate, because we all have learned something. We all have learned, doesn't matter how much we can apply, but we, compared to so many other people, have at least learned something of, like, some ways of changing our minds. Because all of you, when I asked who of you has never been here, all of you said, you've been here already. So that means you've gotten something in your hands, which makes it my kind of philosophy. Since even before I met Buddhism, I always felt the more you have, the more responsibility you have. So the more, let's say, you have money, the more is your responsibility to share with others, right? So similar, the more power you have, the more you need to use that power to benefit others, and so forth. Similarly, the more Dharma you have, the more is your responsibility to free others who do not have anything. Which then means that the reason why, it's so simple actually, the reason why we say we are responsible for helping other people. Yes, we can talk about the 7 cause and effect of generating bodhicitta, the 5 ways of equalizing, exchanging people and yourself and others. But the actual one, like to make it very simple, is you're responsible for saving and liberating and freeing all sentient beings from their suffering because you're the one who has the capacity. You have the capacity to do that. You have, in Tibetan we say nipa, you have the power to do that. So this is why you have to do it. It's like, how can you not do it? It's like you imagine yourself on a mountain of all these beautiful, lovely, kind mother sentient beings, and they're all looking at you and screaming your name and saying, help me, help me, help me. I've been suffering in samsara since the beginning this time, and you're still not doing anything for me. Please, please, please. And you're saying like, okay, I'm turning around and I don't care. We wouldn't do that even if we just have a biscuit, right? I mean, if you have 1,000 ants, I never know, aunties, okay, around you. No, not aunties, the opposite, the creature with the 6 legs. How do we say it? Ants. Okay. Ameisen.
British or American.
Okay. So how do we say it in Hindi? Oh, chitti. Chitri. Chitti. Okay. So you're having 1,000 chittis around you, and you have just 1 biscuit, right? But all of them look at you. They have been starving. They all need to work. How could you not, even though you don't have a whole cake, to share with them, but you have at least a biscuit. So at least that you would share with everyone, right? All of these ants, you could share at least that little biscuit with them. Similarly, with everyone we meet, even though right now we might not be a Buddha, we might not have all these things, but everything we have is really to be shared with them, because everything that we have is coming from them. Like it's like every single moment of happiness we've ever experienced in our lives is always coming from the kindness of the person that you're meeting right now. Like it's so kind. And this is why we're saying, what is kinder, the guru or sentient beings? It's equal, or maybe sentient beings are even more kind. I don't know. It's very difficult. There's a big debate that we have in Buddhism about that particular topic, who's kinder. And yeah, I mean, I almost, even though anyway, that's a difficult debate. But yeah, so in that way, which I think, again, bringing it back to the most practical, because we have only a small talk. So I try to kind of, there's great potential to talk about enlightenment and so forth, but let's make it very practical. Even if you're just meeting every person, if we could just go out to this world, meeting people, instead of thinking, we have something which is the first labeling thought. Whenever we meet anyone, we always have some thought about them. We always think, oh, they are tall, or they have nice hair, or they have a big nose. Like the Tibetans, they always call, I have a big nose, because I have this Western long nose. So whenever I come around them, they say big nose, we have all these kind of funny things that we think about each other. And instead, if we could just exchange that thought with, may you be happy. So whenever you meet anyone, doesn't matter how small the creature is that we're meeting, how tall the person is that we're meeting, if we could, whomever it is, whichever sentient being it is, if we could just think, may you be happy. And then see how are you interacting from that point of view with the person that you're meeting. So if you're practicing love, then think, how may you be happy, whomever you meet. That could be, and it's difficult to generate this kind of thought hold, because in Delhi we meet so many people in one day, right? If you're in the taxi, all the time many people. If you can do, great. That can be your mantra for the whole day, for the whole life, But if you could at least have this as an exercise, as the first 3 people that you meet when you wake up, or the first 3 people that you meet when you're going out of the house. If you can kind of generate those very practical kind of exercises in your life, which is making such a difference, and if we can integrate these little exercises, and see how does that affect your way of interacting with others. So that could maybe be a first step of opening our hearts and using people as a means to generate love and compassion. And then, of course, the question is, what's the actual root of suffering, right? I mean, for that, I'm not qualified enough. I can't talk much about this whole topic of emptiness and so forth. But even if we can just go into misconception of reality, even if we can just go on a very basic bottom line, we all, I think, have once made the experience that we thought something very strongly about a person whom we never talked to, for example, and then suddenly we get in contact with them and we have a total, complete opposite experience of them. So I, for example, once had an experience where I was a bit suspicious of someone and thinking they might be a bit weird, and I was almost a bit afraid. I had this, I better stay away from that person. And I also felt they are looking at me a bit in a weird way, and I felt like, I don't know. And then they turned out to be the kindest person, Or once, for example, I was even younger than now and even more naive than now. I'm still very naive, but I was doing a trek in Ladakh by myself. I had no idea where to go. I had 2 maps who showed a different path, and I was just saying, I'm going off. So I ended up at a place where there was no house, where there was supposed to be a house to sleep. So I had to do a 2-day trek in 1 day. So there were more days to come, but I had to reach by night to another village. So I was what to do. So then suddenly there appeared this man, I was 19, had long blonde hair, and there was this man who was 40, and everybody told me, you have to be careful with, being a blonde girl, so young and alone. And then we went through, and he said, come. And of course, my Hindi was kharab, and then his English was non-existent. And then at this time, I also didn't know Tibetan, so he was Ladakhi, so if I knew a little bit of Tibetan, then we could have maybe made it. But somehow we couldn't. So somehow, of course, everything said, no, you shouldn't, that is a man, he invites you to come with you and so forth. But I said, what to do? I hadn't drank anything. I was very naive. I didn't bring water, I didn't bring snacks, I didn't bring, anyway. So he said, come. So I said, okay, I follow him. So it turned out that he had this very small little hut in the middle of nowhere, where he had mango juice, maza, and he gave me a maza. And he said, sit with me in the shadow for like 20 minutes just to cool down, relax, and then you head off again. And in these moments, you recognize how strong perception, like your conception of something is, and how wrong we can be with that. So similarly, if we recognize that in our day-to-day life, just giving the space that it might be different than what you experience, and might be different than what we right now have as an appearance. So even just having that slight doubt of, is it necessarily as it appears? Even having that kind of slight doubt might open our minds up to be a bit more open, a bit less grasping, and kind of bits less so tired about how the things that we experience at the moment. And of course, then we can think about the first kind of step of wisdom, which is just recognizing impermanence, for example, particularly when we recognize we're having problems, and just recognizing the impermanence of it, and also the impermanence of ourselves. Usually we use the whole concept of death, and impermanence as a means to bring more urgency in our lives, bring more this idea of like, I really shouldn't waste a single moment. For me personally, I once had this, when I did a little retreat on impermanence some years ago. And at some point it made a bit click, where I thought, for me it became almost the opposite. The more I reflected on death and impermanence, and do not understand me wrong here, I'm not suicidal or anything like this, but it became almost more relaxed, because I recognized there are so many things I do not really have to worry so much about, because they're so irrelevant in the face of death. because we worry so much about so many things that happen that are really not that don't need so much worry and so much attention. So it's more like filtering out a bit what is really worthwhile to put effort into. So this can actually almost become a release, you know, to just recognize, okay, that's the situation, it's impermanent, I'm impermanent, I'm gonna die, this situation will not last forever, and even if I'm struggling right now, okay, it's gonna end eventually, you know, and some things, like, really, is it really important if I have a pimple right now somewhere? I mean, we can spend so much time trying to hide certain things, you know, or is it really important if I have a big sweat thing here right now because it's hot? I'm gonna die. It really doesn't matter if somebody remembers me with a sweat thingy here. You know, we have so much mental garbage that we put in our mind. Really, I think, in order to, that's another thing, in order to really be able to put Dharma in our minds, it's a bit like, first we have to clean our rubbish a bit out. So it's not just enough to go to all these nice teachings and read all these nice books. It's a lot about first kind of cleaning up, really. I mean, it's like, if you buy this place newly, let's say, this beautiful room here that you decorated so beautiful, imagine now this is being filled up with stuff of like garbage bags. And this is all what we're doing whenever we're scrolling for like minutes and minutes. What's that? Huh? Unlearning, yes. Like unlearning, cutting the wires, getting things out, getting things rid of. Thank you, that's a good word. Unlearning certain things. So in the same way as whenever we kind of, you know, we put so much information in our minds, and this really has to do with a bit like, again, getting rid of a few habits, being very, very honest, where do we, with ourselves, and maybe also with each other actually, but that's a different topic I'm going to touch on in a moment, is like being very honest with ourselves of what kind of stuff do we actually want to put into our minds, because nothing gets lost in the mind. So we have to actually be a bit careful with what kind of stuff we fill this mind up with. And every time when we kind of unintentionally, and these days it happens even more with, you know, advertisement, with particular media. I mean, you all know how the swiping goes, and suddenly an hour or 2 or 3 or 4 passed. And just to be really not in an, you know, we don't need to beat ourselves up. You know, there's no point in beat your afflictions, not yourself. You know, don't beat yourself up, beat your afflictions. You know, it's more like, okay, I have this habit, I'm getting into this habit myself, like me too, it can happen that like that is gone. But it's more like being really, really honest and saying, okay, I have this habit of kind of putting lots of garbage in my mind constantly. What can I get? Why am I so afraid of the boredom and the space in between? And I think here we can learn a lot from our elder generation. Like when we spend some time, for example, when I spend time with my father, all my grandparents passed, but I have a few kind of older elderly friends who are above their 70s or even 80s. It's amazing how good they are at just being, you know. My dad sometimes says, I ask him, what did you do today? He's retired. And then he says, I was on the balcony. And I ask him, okay, and what did you do? And he said, I was just on the balcony. And it's amazing, you know. We don't know how to do that. He's not Buddhist at all, nothing to do with spirituality. He's like more like a political person, you know. But he's perfect in just being. So if we could just not be so afraid of having empty space, because that's the most healthy thing for our mind, is to just have an empty space where the mind can just be. And then things that we know, and you know, that is the space where they made, I think, a study that one of the best things for creativity is boredom, for kids particular. So now these days, I think a lot of kids, you know, are so filled up and don't know how to be bored, that there's no space for creativity to come up. So if we want to be creative, you know, and if we want to have like a nice mind that has space for wonderful thoughts to come up. We need to give it that space, and that sometimes is just not filling it in with so much information. And I actually planned in my day-to-day life, I have plans where I'm saying I'm not even meditating. I have in my, because I have a very tight schedule in my study program. It starts very early and it ends very late, so it's fully scheduled. So I have actually in my schedule inside 5 minutes nothing. And this means I'm not allowed to do anything. I'm sitting on my bed and I just sit. And when I started doing that, I felt so uncomfortable because everything in myself says I need to do something. And I recognize almost automatically my hand goes to the phone, or my hand goes to the, I don't know, need to write or something. And I really kind of I'm trying to stick to that, to say at least 5 minutes a day is time for nothing. And that just means nothing. And that's the best way to check if you're friends with yourself. The best way to check, one second, I see you. Mm-hmm. A time play? It's time to play, yes. Time to play for, oh, sorry, thank you. Time to play, yes. I mean, having this playful, cheerful, humorous mind, that comes to the humor part, that is very important. Think also in the Dharma world, particularly, I don't know, you guys are maybe a bit, I don't know, have maybe less that stiffness that we might find in some of the Western communities, but maybe you have, I don't know, you can check within yourself. But, I mean, in German we have this bad expression, Stock im Arsch, which means like you have a stick in your ass, you know, which means you're like this, and you're trying really to make the Dharma, you know, really, really tight, and we become very tight. And I think if we could just learn to not take ourselves too serious, and sometimes just, you know, even if you have really weird thoughts, you know, instead of thinking, oh, I shouldn't think like this, that's very bad. We had a New Year retreat the other day where also Apruva was, and there was this lady who came later to me and said, I feel so guilty, I feel so bad. I had so bad thoughts, so terrible thoughts during the retreat. I was thinking about I won't share too much, but she was like, I've thought so terrible things. And I said, it's like, so what? You know, who says you have to take them serious? You know, you can just, because it's just a matter of mind, right? So the thought of a pink elephant and the thought of a cloud, the thought of killing your mother, you know, yes, of course, if we follow them and if we take them serious and if we're under the control of them, then they become dangerous and powerful. As long as you look at them, you know, smile at them and say, haha, you're trying to trick me, you know, no power. No power. We don't have to be afraid of any thought that arises in our minds. So this is why we don't have to take these things too serious and rather kind of take a bit of a humorous attitude, particularly when people think, say, or do things to us, you know, to not take it too serious. That might help. So thank you. The playfulness is a good point.
I was reading about some child prodigies who are very successful in their life and earn a lot of money and fame, like Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston. But later I learned that they were very tormented people who never
Yes.
really were really satisfied with their
Yes.
life.
Yes.
Michael Jackson died. I read that he didn't have a nose because he wanted to look like a white man.
Yes. Well, if you want to look like a white man, you want to have a long nose.
Yeah.
Yes, I know. Yeah, that's a good point. This is exactly what meant with this whole idea of like the 8 worldly concerns, right? As you can have the greatest riches, you can have the greatest, you know, whatever. Actually, they made this, I think, study that I once read. I think Glenn Svensson put this out about, you know, people who are on the super rich end, like not just millionaires, but rather billionaires. They made this study with how much does their happiness increase. And until a certain point, like let's say until you become like stable, where your basic needs are fulfilled, actually your happiness can increase to some extent, at least the way that they measured happiness. It does increase to an extent that you kind of become more stable and less worrisome about certain things. But then it stops. You get like a little rush of like a short term, for a few minutes, maybe a short-term moment of pleasure. But then the problem is that you're always gonna end up with exactly the same problem, which is why I told my of my Indian family, we have a friend's family, Indian family, and the boy, he wanted to start studying business or management. I think everybody studies either this these days. And then I told him, okay, great, I can't tell him that's not great. I said, great, so what do you want to have with that? And then he said, I want to have 2 cars. I said, great, and then I asked him, okay, so write this down somewhere. Make yourself a note somewhere that you're saying, once you're rich enough to have 2 cars, it's enough. You don't have to work more. Then otherwise you'll just do the same thing and keep doing the same thing again and again and again and again. You're always going to be dissatisfied. And sometimes I believe that if you are very, very rich and you live in this, because at least for poor people, you can keep the illusion that gaining more money would make you happier. So somehow you can keep that illusion. As a rich person, you at some point come to a place where you're recognizing, it doesn't make me happier. And if you don't know any other tools, then it becomes almost more like a complete, total downfall, I guess. So, yes. Is there anything else that I was thinking to do? Oh, yes. We have until 8:38. 8. Okay. So, with respect to that whole idea of playfulness, there are 2 other very important things I think that are quite important to not just have a short-term Dharma experience, but to particular if you have been trying to practice longer, which I was very grateful that one of my teachers told me after actually only like maybe 4 years ago or so, where I was having a little bit of a crisis, my own little Dharma crisis, which is totally part of the process. So I didn't do my practices very well. I felt very lost. I didn't do some of my commitments, and I felt like, how do I get back to that? And he very kindly reached out to me and said, you need 2 things. You need joy and you need confidence. And I think we miss a lot out on the joy. We need to connect. Confidence and effort comes by itself if you enjoy it. So if you, for example, have a movie night, I don't know if any of you did, but I sometimes, particularly as a teenager, I really liked Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. So sometimes we did like these marathons, like all 3 Lord of the Rings thing for the whole night. And I remember, you sit with your friend, it was my friend and me, and then you sit like this and you're trying your best to stay awake the whole time. And maybe your hand is almost falling asleep and everything, but you do it. Why? Because of the joy, right? There is this one aspect that keeps you going, that somehow enjoys it, which is we bear so much pain, we bear pain in the legs, we bear the pain of keeping awake and so forth. We bear it. Why? Because of the joy. So similarly with the Dharma and with these activities, if we have the joy, effort comes by itself. So then the question is, how do we get the joy, right? So the joy we get only if we kind of see its benefits and if we actually connect it to our hearts. So then the question is rather like to yourself, like how do you get the joy? So that's the big question, because if we keep, I almost feel it can be dangerous to keep pushing ourselves while we do not enjoy the Dharma. Because then sometimes what can happen is we might even generate aversion towards certain practices if we really don't like it. And that is the worst thing that we want with the Dharma. The worst thing is that we want to become totally, I don't want to even see the cushion, which is why it's kind of healthier to generate an attitude that is maybe a bit more easygoing, a bit more relaxed, a bit more long-term thinking, with a joyful attitude. And then also hardships, then hardships are not a problem. Then hardships are, again, a joyful process. Then it's like, yeah, my pain hurts, yeah, I'm falling asleep, but yeah, I'm feeling hungry or thirsty. But you're like, I'm doing it because I have the joy, I'm doing it because I know for what. So that is one thing. And the second thing is confidence. So to some extent, when I think we should feel, even in the sutra system, even yet not talking about like this whole tantric pride that we might hear in different traditions, but even we should have this sense of self-confident pride that says, I have met the Buddha Dharma, I have met some tools, I have met wonderful teachers, and I can deal with whatever happens. I believe in the strength of the Dharma. It's more like we should have this kind of attitude of fortitude and pride that says, I'm going to rock it, I'm going to do it, you know. Okay, I've been failing, sure, I'm doing it again, and I'm going to fail again, sure, but I'm doing it again, with this kind of attitude of confidence. So I think we need both of that. And for me personally, the main key to that is also compassion, actually. Even though compassion is actually can lead to something that we call a noble sadness at times, where we feel really, you know, there's it's just really sad if we look around, you know, and see what people are really going through. But there's also the sense of unstoppability, you know. Even if the world thinks I'm crazy for thinking I want to become enlightened, for thinking I want to free all sentient, even if I don't know if enlightenment exists, you know, even if I doubt that, just having this strong confidence of, I'm gonna free each and every single sentient being from their suffering. Why? Because they are suffering. Not because they are someone special, because I like them, because they're kind to me, but it's because suffering needs to be removed. Not my suffering or their suffering. Suffering needs to be removed, because suffering is wrong. So then if there's something that is wrong in general, it doesn't matter who has it, it needs to be removed. So having that kind of attitude of, okay, I'm going to remove suffering, and I'm going to do it with whatever I have to do for that. I'm going to do it. This gives also this kind of confidence that says, in German we have this nice word which is trotzig. I don't know a nice word that goes as much in line with that. Do you have a nice word for trotzig? Yeah, not really. I don't know. It's more like this almost stubbornness, you know, where you're saying, you can say whatever you want. The whole world can think I'm crazy. I'm still gonna do it. This kind of teenage, like, even if my dad tells me I should not go out, I'm still gonna do it. This kind of attitude of like, nobody can stop me. This unstoppability kind of feeling is what we want to develop with respect to our Dharma practice, and in particular with respect to compassion. Because really, I mean, this world is going mad, and we need as many people as they are to do something. And I feel so grateful for every one of you who is, even if, you know, I don't know you, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm sure you're doing something good, and that is really what everyone needs around. So even if the only thing that you take from this course is going out and to think kindly in your heart, may you be happy, to somebody else, then I think this was not for nothing, you know, then there was some benefit from what we are doing here together. And then even if we're not having a proper Dharma practice of waking up in the morning at 4 o'clock and doing like 5 hours of prayer, you know, even not that, if you are having 3 things complete, which is going mad every day, which one of our teachers likes to say, mad for motivation, A for action, and then D for dedication. If we have these 3 things complete, when you wake up, instead of having as the first thought, I need coffee, you know, which then becomes your motivation for this whole day, right? I mean, this becomes kind of the first, so maybe then you're not planting the causes for something big, but you're planting maybe the causes for next life to become a big coffee bean. I don't know, impossible, but you know what I mean? It's kind of a very, very short-termed thing. So instead of having these kind of very short-termed ideas, rather try to go with the biggest, vastest motivation possible. Here, one thing that I integrated in order to become practical, I find sometimes, I don't know, for those people who've been practicing Dharma longer, what sometimes can happen is that we have all these nice things for the benefit of all sentient beings. I'm going to become a Buddha for all sentient beings. We do all these great prayers, which is our big, vast motivation, which we need if we consider ourselves, Buddhist, or if we want to kind of, even not Buddhist, but just saying, I want to, make it as big as possible, Because again, whom can we really leave out? Again, if you imagine yourself on this mountain of sentient beings who are looking at yourself, crying you for, pledging you, begging you for help, which is the real situation that we're finding ourselves right now in, could you say to anybody, everybody but you? We couldn't, right? I mean, the way to generate an idea of what bodhicitta is, I think, even the mere question, okay, for everybody, if maybe you can raise your hand, if you could, at this very moment, if you had, I know it's sadly not possible, but if you at this very moment had the opportunity in one finger snap to take away all the suffering of all sentient beings, would you? Who would? You wouldn't. Okay, we discuss in a moment. But if you could, right, and there is this moment of, I would love to be able to take away the suffering of all sentient beings. If I could, within one finger snap, take away the suffering of all sentient beings, I would. That kind of intention that says, okay, I would love to be able to do that, That's a very big motivation, of course, very huge. But then we need to get practical. What sometimes happens is we get lost in a big motivation and we forget the next step we need to take, which means, okay, so because I want all of that, I need to look at my own mind and need to see, my main obstacle at the moment is that I'm getting very quickly irritable with my mother-in-law. So maybe today my main motivation in order to reach the big goal is to really work on my anger with respect to my mother-in-law, for example. So sometimes when we have this big motivation, we forget to take the next steps. And then we get stuck in this big thinking, big talking, big doing, but not really start to, on a practical level, actually work on ourselves. And then then comes the next point, right? We had the big motivation and we have a practical motivation on what we want to work with. And then comes the actual action. And for that one, we need a checking system. So if, let's say, in the morning, you say, okay, today I want to particularly work with love, for example. Then we need a checking system throughout the day in order to check in and see, am I actually having love in my mind right now? Am I actually having anger in my mind right now? So for that, we can then use these apps, that we might have with a little ring that comes up every 3 hours, where you can stop for 2 seconds and just check in your mind, am I having love in my mind? Or you can use exercises, what I like to do, which needs quite a lot of mindfulness actually, where you can take a certain challenge where you're saying, for example, whenever I'm passing through a door, that's usually what I really like to do. Whenever passing through the door, I remember love. Or whenever I'm hearing my phone ring, I'm thinking about love. That was thanks to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So you can use kind of certain mind exercises where you're saying, whenever this XYZ happens, I'm gonna remind myself of what was my main goal, aim that I'm working with today. And then in the evening, at the end, we need the third thing, we need the dedication, where you're bringing it back and saying, every goodness that I've done today, every goodness that I've tried, I'm again bringing it back to the big motivation, saying it's for that goal and for nothing else. And here it's really in the end, it's getting back to sentient beings, right? It's like going back, it's not just for me, I'm sharing it with everyone. So that then we have a complete practice. And then the best thing, if we could, then we don't need, if that is not your thing, then the prayers and so forth, if you want to put your life in a good direction, let's say like that, if you have these 3 things complete, I think you're on a good path. They don't have to worry too much. Of course, then we need, if it depends on what you're striving for, then we can add on. But I think that's really the basic level. And then in the evening, if you can, It doesn't have to be formal. You can sit on the couch. You can do this after your 5 minutes of doing nothing. You can just sit down and say, okay, if you have a good self-esteem, you can think about what things maybe went a bit wrong today. You can think, okay, my main motivation today was love. Where did I slip away from it a bit? Where did I, go a bit away from the highway that I was on? And then you can use that as your motivation for next day. So if, let's say, you're recognizing today I've become irritable, or today my mindfulness was totally out of the window, then maybe you can say, okay, because that is something that happened, the opposite, the antidote to that, let's say, for example, mindfulness, or let's say love, or let's say forgiveness, becomes my motivation for the next day. So then you can actually have a checking system, and if you, best case scenario, even write these things down, if you can even have a little notebook, a practice notebook, where you can have a little plus and a little minus, a little bodhicitta check, where you can say, here it went well, here it went a bit off. Then what you will see is that over days and weeks, you can actually see how you're progressing, which is extremely reassuring and it's extremely encouraging. Then the joy comes, because you can actually over weeks, months, years, can actually start seeing that change is happening, that certain things become easier. And also sometimes by writing it down, you take a little bit more time to kind of put yourself this mirror. And when you're having this mirroring to yourself, then it becomes easier to say, okay, here I can see very clearly what I need to work on. And then you can use that on your motivation. And then of course, so that's with respect to the little minus that we find at the end of the day, where we're saying, oh, here we went a bit off. And then of course, the best before we sleep, the rejoice. And here it's just allowing yourself to bliss out about all the goodness that you've seen in yourself and in others. And that's the best antidote towards jealousy, of course, where we're just rooting. We're rooting for everyone who's trying their best. And then this gives us a very good night's sleep, because you're like, oh, how wonderful. And this will make us again get more into the whole idea of enjoying the Dharma, where we're saying, how wonderful, how great, maybe tomorrow, if I get another day, I want to do it again, So then we don't have, I think if we do that, these three things, I think we're on a good way. Okay. So, it's 8 o'clock. Yes. Yes. So maybe we can now go into the debate. So I'm debating all day. So, because I'm part of this program, I'm sadly not as good as Bishala, but I like debate. So maybe we can open it up for some discussion, for some discussion or questions or anything that there is. Let me know. Oh, there is. Okay. So is there anything that anyone would? Yes. That's okay. I don't want to put you on the spot, but would you like to share what is your reason behind saying, oh, maybe I would not?
It's not maybe, I would not.
Okay, why not?
Because I don't think it's about suffering.
What do you think? It's about happiness. Or what is it about? Tell me.
It's a bit complicated, and I would have to think a little bit. But technically, I believe suffering is part of the growing process. So if you remove the suffering, for a lot of people, we will not have the opportunity to grow and to evolve and to become the best version of ourselves. That's one of the elements. But I also believe that suffering is part of the world. We don't try to escape the suffering. We try to escape the condition of being victim of the flow of the universe, not to be in control of our destiny. And the suffering it can take a lot of forms, but technically it's when we do not accept. It's the thing not to accept that. It's difficult to express, but yeah. I still believe that
to try to escape the suffering is an illusion of the ego.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's a good way to motivate people to join this
Right.
Anyway,
Right.
I convince it's deeper than that.
Thank you. So I had a lot of discussions with people about that, because it's true, I think, even just on the matter of, I think sometimes telling people we can be free from suffering can sometimes even have the opposite effect, which then means like that people have even more aversion towards the suffering that they have, and even less, how to say, less acceptance. So I had a lot of discussions about that with quite a few people, and I think I see where you're coming from. So this has, I guess, very much to do with exactly the idea of, is there even such a state of actually removal of suffering? You know, is there actually such a state? That's the big $1 million Nobel Prize Peace Prize. If you could get the answer to that, I guess we would get the Nobel Prize. But the main question, of course, would be like, is there even such a thing as end of suffering of all sentient being, right? So that's the big question. So I guess that is where we're getting to, right?
That's one of the possibility, but I think it's a condition of being alive. Suffering is part of the fact of being alive.
Right.
And
yeah.
We will have to go into more metaphysics.
Right.
And I already annoyed a lot of people with my theory, so I'm not going to go
don't worry.
into that. But if you want to escape the cycle of reincarnation, that's for the people who believe in the cycle of reincarnation, I have a different conception, is that we try to escape the physical condition of being in this world. And the physical condition of being in this world is to be bound by the physical condition of the universe.
Yeah.
And that includes the flow of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I really believe that in fact what we try to escape is the flow of time. It's not the condition of suffering.
Oh, I would love to one day sit with you. No, really, because it's really, really, I like all these kind of
but again,
yes.
So I understand, and I understand that it's much easier within the framework of this universe to try to explain people through the motivation of escaping the suffering. But I believe it's deeper.
So I think one thing, it doesn't really matter right now. I think one of the things which I think is quite beautiful, what I just thought about, I don't know if it makes any sense, but there is this prayer that we say, if you really want to have the Bodhisattva attitude, you're saying, I'm not even trying to escape my own suffering in that sense, for good, you know, you're saying, I'm willing to stay in samsara for endless time, and I'm willing to take on whatever suffering there is, to just help wherever I can. Let's say even that.
I mean, that's a good question. You took a really good example of your father who was upset at that stage.
Yes.
And I imagine you have plenty of these examples in your memory. And some of these situations probably you suffer from them. And that's what brings you in this path that you are today. So you have to acknowledge that some of the suffering it's what makes you the person you are today.
Surely. So there is no question that suffering, where Shantideva even says that suffering has many good qualities. It makes you humble. It kind of dispels your arrogance. It kind of wants to, it opens your heart and so forth. So definitely through suffering you can get very, very far. But then again, the qualities that I try to develop through the suffering are those that will help me to suffer less when I meet the next point, to then help others to suffer less to meet the next difficult situations. So surely on the process of removing suffering, to whichever extent, let's say, even if you can't fully remove, let's say, or on the process of living a happier, more satisfied, meaningful life, let's say like that, without even talking about what's the end goal, just living a meaningful, satisfied life, you can use any suffering or problem, and this can, I think, get you very far on the process, if you know how to use it. If you don't know how to use it, then suffering is just suffering. So, yeah. let's discuss this. I want to kind of go maybe first. Yes, and then yes. Anyway, I don't know. Yes, you raised earlier maybe your hand, and then.
My question is about this. Also, the story you shared with your father.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I tried to do that, like in conversation with my grandmother, for example,
Mm-hmm.
like it's not exactly like I will definitely try what you shared next
Yeah.
time, which seems much more, but kind of versions of that. There's always like a deep sense of pain also. Like there's always a huge pain that's there and a sadness, and that I can't seem to get rid of. No matter how much I try to, like dissociate in the moment.
May I ask you what kind of, is it pain about the situation, pain about her pain, or pain of being hurt?
Yeah, of her pain, I guess, or the situation,
Yeah.
or whatever it is. There is like
I mean, if I can be hard and honest, how I personally deal with these things, there is a sense of noble sadness that we sometimes talk about in the Buddhist teachings. And sadness and pain is not listed among afflictions. So there is some sort of sadness that comes with compassion. But the compassionate aspect, so the thing that really makes the difference is it a sadness that paralyzes you? Then you're stuck with empathy. So we make a difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy is feeling the other person's pain and feeling it and having it. Compassion goes one step further, and then it's actually a driving force that kind of says, okay, there's pain, okay, there's suffering, okay, there's sadness. I'm going to do something. So it's like this unstoppable force of whatever can I give. So if you feel pain there, it's not necessarily bad. So you don't have to necessarily get rid of it, but the only thing we have to take care is that you're utilizing that in a way that it makes you become even more enthusiastic to actually do something, whatever means we have. So this is at least my way of dealing with it at the moment. And the one here really, the only hope we have is really to get, I guess, to get a better understanding of emptiness. At some point I really had this, I came quite crying to my teacher and told him, like, if you look at this world and the situation and at people, and I really believe the one thing that gives us real hope is the better we understand emptiness and wisdom. That's the one thing that's our light torch of hope. So then the sadness and the pain that we feel is something that we are willing and happy to bear. That we're saying, I'm taking it on. Why? Because it's worthwhile. And then you see this pain, you see the suffering, you're welcoming it, and you're using it. And then of course, if we have those four immeasurables and we have them in a way that we can put them in a chariot, like 4 horses running. So if your compassion is falling into, this paralyzed misery, then you need to focus on joy. If your love, goes into attachment and desire, then you need to look at equanimity, right, to balance it off. If your equanimity becomes very becomes very like apathetic, then again you need to look at compassion, you need to look at suffering. If your joy becomes just frivolous, running after pleasures and so forth, and kind of taking joy in things that don't really bring happiness, then you need love to recognize what people do, what kind of happiness do they really need. So which is why we have the 4 immeasurables working together, pulling each other, helping each other. If one becomes weak and falls to its false facsimiles, which seem like compassion, but are not, or seem like one of them, but are not, for example, just this feeling of misery, then we have the backup. So then it would be good to learn kind of the relationship between the four immeasurables. If you know them very well, then you know how to aid yourself if you fall into depression and sadness. Does this make sense?
Yeah,
Okay. Okay. Yes.
This is really the question on the suffering.
Mm.
It's very clearly the Buddha said that I teach suffering and the end of the suffering. One may listen about suffering, cause it the suffering. One may talk about that, but unless or until one is actually experiencing the suffering, I think the end of the suffering will not really take place. I mean, like some of the teachers saying that in samsara, you are almost sitting like a pin, on the top of the pin. But normally we feel that we are sitting on a very solid rock. So unless or until one is really feeling that, yes, I'm in samsara, I'm sitting on a tip of the pin, I think the suffering will continue because there's no understanding of that. Just saying that we are all sitting here, if there's a fire in this, we will all run out because we know that we are going to suffer. So the question is that it's not enough really to know what suffering is. Is my mind really relating that what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, what I'm speaking, is it going to cause suffering or not? I think that I really find it very challenging. So I really wanted that you could throw some light that what could be that process of the identification where I can really relate, yes, I think this is.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think almost everything you said is already explaining exactly what you said, because it just, I felt like, oh wow, that is very insightful for me, so thank you. I don't know if I try to get back to it, I maybe take a little circle around it. I think for me, where I had the discussion with one of my teachers about that topic, where do we actually get this feeling of like every single moment of samsara is actually samsara? It's very difficult to actually come to that realization because we have never experienced the opposite. So which is why I believe, so I had a lot of discussion. I personally came to a conclusion in my mind at the moment, which is a working hypothesis in my debate. So I haven't yet come to a conclusion, but this is my working hypothesis. I don't think you get to that strongly in your mind for people in our age particularly, unless you have an understanding of emptiness. Because I think with the concept, with having at least a taste of emptiness, that's the only thing that gives you the opposite of what actual liberation is, and everything looks so pale once you've got the taste of emptiness. So everything that right now seems to be happiness, everything that right now seems to be not suffering, which is so much of an experience, becomes so pale and grey and dark and terrible once you've gotten at least a tinge on your tongue of the taste of what actual liberation is, and that you don't get unless you get a taste of emptiness. So I think which is why they sometimes say that the strongest form of compassion is the one when you actually have understood that liberation exists and come to an understanding, a realization of emptiness, getting out of there, seeing how senselessly suffering is and how strong even the pleasure is just appearing as total nonsense and total suffering. So I think really to get there, we need to get at least a little taste on our tongue on emptiness. I think that is the one that will really push us. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but
yeah. I think I really want to see from a slightly different perspective. The word dukkha, which is coming from the Sanskrit, they said that there are two One is do and the come. The do is nearly narrowed down. I don't know how you will see etymologically the Tibetan word called do-ngel. They also sometimes put like that. So do is narrowed down, and the come is the space. So the space which is narrowed down and made so small, that really becomes the basis for the suffering. It's almost like saying that it is like a very narrow self-centeredness. So as long as it's there, the suffering is bound to be there.
Right.
So I think that's like the ground.
Yes.
If one can remove that,
Yes.
as all the teachers saying, it's really then instead of cherishing self, it's a cherishing others.
Yeah.
So I think, emptiness, everyone says, but to me, it's a bit far. But this one, to me, it appears it's more workable.
Yes.
I can relate it very clearly.
Yes, it's a bit more direct and practical,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, that's a good point. I really like how you kind of narrowed down the etymology. It's like a bit what just comes to my mind, this whole idea of boundlessness, right? I mean, right now we are so much imprisoned in a very small, tight way of being with ourselves, with the world, with everything. And the moment, like, the boundlessness of what we could experience with others and the love and the compassion that we could have towards sentient beings. And then, of course, the biggest boundlessness that we can have is when we get rid of the boundary of concept of self. But even if that is very far away, just kind of opening ourselves up completely to this boundlessness, I guess, goes very much to what you said. And then having the opposite of that, being very tight and neurotic in this just neurosis of identity that we created.
Yeah, put it, the whole immeasurable, you said about that. I think to begin with, I really find that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. Okay, anything else?
Somebody was asking if you could share a little bit about cultivating joy, a little bit more about that.
Yes, cultivating joy. So now I would need to know if Roy, I think who's, just try to see on, they have their things closed. Okay, so of course I don't know yet right now what kind of joy you're talking about. So when we're talking here about the joy in the four immeasurables, then it's generally not just joy in terms of having a fun, but it's more talking about the joy in actual practice, the joy in Dharma, and the joy in finding delight in any virtuous activity that you do. And this again, I guess, has a lot to do with having in the beginning a bit of a taste almost, which I think is why a lot of people who have done like a longer course or who have once met a great teacher and something clicked in their minds, sometimes you feel that this really kind of can take them a long way, because you get a little bit of an understanding of how great the mind can be. And then we do the hard work of sitting down for many weeks, months, and whatever years to again get to those little tastes. But how to cultivate joy? Yeah, I would love to talk to you so that I know what exactly your question is talking about. Let's look at the opposite. When do we become lazy? We don't have joy, for example. So I think to cultivate joy is a lot to do with almost removing the opposite. So what are the things that are showing us signs of us not having joy? It's the laziness, of course, the laziness of the three, that we have different types of laziness. We have the laziness of that is just like mere, laziness of the typical one, the procrastination one. Then we have the laziness of totally busying ourselves up, totally kind of becoming totally enjoying things that are meaningless, basically. And then we have the third type of laziness that thinks I'm totally unworthy and I can't do it. So all of them are ways of not having joy. So then how do we cultivate joy? So one is just finding real meaning. So I have my own personal experiences with joy is that when you come to a point where it becomes so valuable to you that anything else becomes like grayish next to it. So when, for example, when your own value of, for example, being kind to somebody, even if they are not kind to you, is so strong in your mind that even if somebody else, you know, is mean to you, and the normal reaction in life would be then to be mean back to that person, but the joy in just knowing your own value of I want to be kind is outshining anything else that you could be doing instead. So then this wish of wanting, it's like, you know, the value of your, or you know the value of your own values of love, compassion, and so forth. They give you such a sense of almost confidence in your heart as well, that they are so meaningful that automatically you want to pour into that more. The problem is that to keep that up, I think that's the problem. We can have joy for some time, but to keep that up is the problem, for which is why we need freshness, I think. I think sometimes we forget the freshness and we become stiff and we do the thing over again in the exact same way, which is what I liked very much with one of the meditation teachers that I met. He put a lot of emphasis on freshness. He said it's good to have few meditation techniques, a few things together and keep it fresh. You have a few things that you can turn to keep it fresh and to kind of get inspiration sometimes from the external with teachers and so forth. This is one thing. Also with just your Dharma friends, but to have some freshness inside of your practice so that you're not getting too bored. So I think that might be something that people might forget in times, that it's okay to modify and to make it personalized. And I think with practice, it's also a way, I think in Dharma practice, is to find your own way of practicing, because it's very easy to try to do everything perfect, be the perfect Dharma student and do everything how everybody else is doing, but somehow nothing moves in your own heart. So then it's okay if everybody practices in the morning, but you are practicing in the evening, you know, because that is where it works better for you, then that is totally fine as well. Kind of to get really in touch with what are the actual things that you appreciate, what are the things that actually are the things that you enjoy in the Dharma. And if that means that it's something else than everybody else at the moment, and it keeps you going and you recognize that this makes you actually enjoy the Dharma, then that's totally fine. So I think it's having a very honest relationship with oneself, and the checking one. I mean, having a little practice diary, I think, is really, really helpful for that as well. That is my personal experience. I don't know. Maybe I've been blobbling around it. Sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay. Shall we then, what time is it? Yeah, it's 8:30, maybe it's getting late. Thank you. So then maybe we can dedicate whatever kind of goodness you have created. Particular for me personally, for thinking that we might meet each other again and again, to benefit each other on whatever path we are on. Because we sometimes think the Buddha is a big deal, the Dharma is a big deal, but we forget about the Sangha. So what means you as a community being together, we need each other, so that this may become a cause that we meet again and again, as many times as we can, to benefit each other on this path, and to be able to utilize all of our body, speech and mind, all our actions, to be able to serve others better in whichever way they need us, so that we can really offer everything we have, and cultivating our body, speech and mind, our qualities, as to the best possible capacity to serve sentient beings, our dear friends, in the best possible way. And then you can make your own personal dedication. In particular to His Holiness the Dalai Lama's long life, and that he will keep helping us and benefiting all sentient beings, because every kindness that we've ever experienced is really due to His Holiness the Dalai Lama's kindness. Okay, thank you.
So, on behalf of everyone, I would like to thank Venerable Thubten Drolkar so much for inspiring us and helping us, to generate some joy in practicing the Dharma. And I hope all of us, when we go out of Tushita and we see some people, the first thought we'll have is, may you be happy. And so thank you so much, and please come back again and again to Tushita whenever you're in Delhi.
Thank you.
And continue to share the Dharma with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of you. It was lovely to meet you.
And I just would like to mention also that Tushita will actually now pause for a summer break. We now have 3 more meditations in the morning.